The morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard of Buckingham Palace as Catherine, Princess of Wales, prepared for what would become one of the most talked-about moments in recent royal history. She stood before the ornate mirror in her private chambers, adjusting the delicate pearl necklace that had once belonged to Queen Elizabeth II. The weight of the jewelry felt heavier than usual, as if carrying the expectations of an entire nation. Catherine had always understood the power of gestures in royal life. Every movement, every glance, every subtle action was scrutinized by millions of people around the world. But today felt different. Today, she sensed that something significant was about to unfold, though she couldn't quite put her finger on what it might be. The palace staff moved with their usual precision around her, preparing for the day's events. Lady Sarah, her longtime lady-in-waiting, noticed the thoughtful expression on Catherine's face. "Your Royal Highness seems particularly contemplative this morning," she observed gently, helping to arrange the flowing fabric of Catherine's elegant navy dress. Catherine smiled softly, her eyes still fixed on her reflection. "I've been thinking about tradition, Sarah. About how sometimes the smallest actions can carry the greatest meaning." She paused, touching the pearls at her throat. "The Queen always said that our role isn't just about ceremonies and appearances. It's about understanding when to speak and when to listen, when to stand tall and when to show humility." The words carried more weight than Sarah realized at the time. Catherine had been reflecting deeply on recent conversations within the royal family, discussions that had revealed tensions and uncertainties about the monarchy's direction in the modern world. King Charles, still adjusting to his new role as sovereign, had been grappling with questions about relevance, public perception, and the delicate balance between maintaining royal dignity and showing genuine human connection. As Catherine made her way through the palace corridors, she encountered various members of the household staff. Each person she passed received a warm smile and a brief, personal greeting. This wasn't unusual for Catherine, who had always been known for her genuine interest in the people who worked tirelessly behind the scenes. However, those who knew her well noticed something different in her demeanor that morning, a quiet intensity, as if she was preparing for something important. The Princess of Wales had always been acutely aware of her position as a link between the traditional monarchy and the modern public. Unlike those born into royal life, she had experienced the world outside palace walls, understanding both the reverence and skepticism that ordinary people felt toward the royal family. This unique perspective had shaped her approach to royal duties, making her particularly sensitive to moments when authentic connection could bridge the gap between crown and country. In the palace's private study, King Charles was reviewing the day's schedule with his private secretary. The agenda included several routine engagements, but the king seemed distracted. He had been carrying the weight of recent public opinion polls that showed mixed feelings about the monarchy's future. While respect for the institution remained, there were growing questions about its relevance in contemporary society. "Your Majesty," his secretary ventured carefully, "the Princess of Wales has requested a brief private audience before the morning's official proceedings begin." Charles looked up from the papers scattered across his desk. Catherine rarely requested formal audiences, preferring informal conversations over family dinners or casual encounters in the palace gardens. The unusual formality of her request intrigued him. "Of course," he replied, setting aside his reading glasses. "Please ask her to join me." When Catherine entered the study, Charles immediately noticed the same quiet intensity that others had observed. She moved with her characteristic grace, but there was something purposeful in her bearing that caught his attention. As she approached his desk, the king rose to greet his daughter-in-law, someone he had come to regard not just as family but as a trusted advisor whose instincts about public sentiment were rarely wrong. "Catherine," Charles said warmly, gesturing toward the comfortable chairs arranged near the window. "You seem to have something particular on your mind this morning." Catherine settled into her chair, her posture perfect as always, but her expression thoughtful. "I've been reflecting on something you said last week about the importance of genuine moments in royal life, about how the public can sense authenticity, even in the most formal circumstances." The king nodded, remembering their conversation about the challenges of modern monarchy. They had discussed how every royal action was analyzed and interpreted, how the family walked a constant tightrope between maintaining dignity and showing human warmth. It was a conversation that had stayed with both of them, highlighting the delicate nature of their public roles. "I believe," Catherine continued, "that sometimes the most powerful statements are made not through words, but through actions that come from the heart." Moments when protocol serves purpose rather than just tradition. Charles leaned forward, intrigued by her words, but unsure where the conversation was heading. Catherine had always possessed an intuitive understanding of public relations, but her tone suggested she was building towards something specific. The morning light streaming through the tall windows cast a golden glow around them, creating an atmosphere of intimacy despite the formal surroundings. "What I'm trying to say," Catherine said, choosing her words carefully, "is that I believe there will be a moment today when the right gesture, made with genuine feeling, could speak louder than any speech or ceremony. Sometimes, the most profound respect is shown not by standing tall, but by choosing to bow low." The king studied her face, seeing something in her expression that reminded him of his late mother. Queen Elizabeth had possessed the same ability to sense pivotal moments, to understand when a particular action could carry meaning far beyond its immediate context. As Charles listened to Catherine's words, he began to sense that she was preparing him for something, though he couldn't imagine what it might be. Their conversation was interrupted by a gentle knock on the door. The morning's official schedule was about to begin, and the palace staff needed to coordinate the complex choreography of royal duties. As Catherine rose to leave, she paused at the door, turning back to face the king with an expression that seemed both determined and serene. "Your Majesty," she said softly, "I hope you'll remember that the strongest leaders are often those who aren't afraid to show humility when the moment calls for it." With those words, Catherine left the study, leaving King Charles with a mixture of curiosity and anticipation. He couldn't shake the feeling that his daughter-in-law was preparing for something significant, something that would require the kind of courage that comes from deep conviction rather than royal protocol. As the morning progressed, various members of the royal household went about their duties, unaware that they were about to witness a moment that would be discussed and analyzed for years to come. The stage was being set for an action so unexpected, so perfectly timed, and so genuinely heartfelt that it would redefine how the public viewed the royal family's capacity for authentic human connection. Catherine moved through her morning preparations with the calm confidence of someone who had made a difficult decision and found peace with it. She understood that true leadership sometimes required stepping outside the comfortable boundaries of tradition, that the most memorable moments in royal history often came from choices that felt risky at the time, but proved to be exactly right in retrospect. The grand ballroom of Buckingham Palace buzzed with controlled energy as distinguished guests from around the world gathered for the annual Commonwealth reception. Ambassadors, high commissioners, and cultural leaders mingled beneath crystal chandeliers that had witnessed countless historic moments. The event represented one of the monarchy's most important diplomatic gatherings, where relationships were strengthened and new connections formed through the careful dance of royal protocol. Catherine entered the ballroom alongside Prince William, their arrival marking the beginning of the formal proceedings. She had chosen to wear a stunning emerald green gown that complemented the grandeur of the surroundings while remaining appropriately elegant for the occasion. The dress moved gracefully as she walked, its fabric catching the light from the magnificent chandeliers above. Among the assembled guests was Mrs. Amara Okafor, a 78-year-old community leader from Ghana who had spent her entire life working to improve education in rural areas of her country. Mrs. Okafor had been invited to represent the extraordinary grassroots efforts that often went unrecognized in international forums. Despite her significant contributions to her community, she felt somewhat overwhelmed by the grandeur of the palace setting. Mrs. Okafor stood near one of the tall windows, nervously adjusting her traditional Ghanaian Kent cloth dress. She had saved for months to purchase the fabric and have it tailored for this special occasion. The vibrant colors and intricate patterns of her outfit stood out beautifully among the more formal Western attire worn by most other guests. However, rather than feeling proud of her cultural heritage, she felt uncertain about whether her choice of clothing was appropriate for such a formal royal event. As the reception progressed, Catherine moved gracefully through the room, engaging in conversations with various guests. She had always prided herself on making genuine connections with people from all walks of life, understanding that these personal interactions often mattered more than the formal speeches and ceremonies that typically dominated royal events. Her training in royal protocol had taught her the importance of making every guest feel valued and welcome, but Catherine's approach went beyond mere duty. She genuinely enjoyed learning about different cultures and hearing stories from people whose experiences differed vastly from her own privileged background. These conversations enriched her understanding of the world and reminded her of the real impact that royal influence could have on ordinary lives. When Catherine noticed Mrs. Okafor standing somewhat apart from the other guests, she immediately sensed the older woman's discomfort. Years of experience at royal events had given Catherine an intuitive ability to identify when someone felt out of place or uncertain about the proper protocol. She had learned that a warm, personal approach could quickly put people at ease and transform what might be an intimidating experience into a memorable positive encounter. As Catherine approached, Mrs. Okafor's eyes widened with surprise and nervousness. She had hoped to blend into the background of the elegant gathering, not expecting to have a personal interaction with such a high-ranking member of the royal family. The older woman quickly tried to remember the proper way to greet a princess, her mind racing through the brief protocol instructions she had received from the Ghanaian embassy. "Mrs. Okafor," Catherine said warmly, her smile immediately putting the older woman at ease. "I'm so delighted to meet you. I've been reading about your incredible work with children's education in Ghana. Your dedication to building schools in remote areas is truly inspiring." The fact that Catherine knew specific details about her work stunned Mrs. Okafor. She had not expected a British royal to be familiar with her small-scale community projects in rural Ghana. The Princess of Wales had clearly taken time to learn about each guest's background, demonstrating a level of personal attention that went far beyond what protocol required. "Your Royal Highness," Mrs. Okafor replied, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. "I am honored that you know of my work. It has been my life's passion to ensure that every child, no matter how remote their village, has access to education." As they continued talking, Catherine learned more about the challenges Mrs. Okafor faced in her educational mission. The older woman described walking miles through difficult terrain to reach isolated communities, often carrying supplies on her back because there were no roads for vehicles. She spoke of sleeping in village huts and sharing simple meals with families who had very little but were eager to support education for their children. Catherine listened intently, asking thoughtful questions that showed genuine interest rather than polite curiosity. She wanted to understand not just what Mrs. Okafor did, but why education meant so much to her and how she had found the strength to continue her work despite numerous obstacles and setbacks. Mrs. Okafor explained that her own childhood had been marked by poverty and limited opportunities. She had been fortunate enough to receive an education through the support of missionaries, and that experience had changed the trajectory of her entire life. "Education gave me hope," she said simply. "And I believe that every child deserves that same hope, regardless of where they are born or what circumstances they face." The conversation deepened as Mrs. Okafor shared stories of individual children whose lives had been transformed by access to schooling. She spoke of a young girl who had walked 2 hours each way to attend classes and eventually became a nurse, returning to serve her own community. She described a boy who had helped build his own school using local materials and later earned a scholarship to study engineering at university. Catherine found herself deeply moved by these stories of resilience and determination. She realized that she was speaking with someone who embodied the very best of human compassion and dedication. Mrs. Okafor represented everything that was noble about service to others, working without recognition or reward because she believed in making a difference in the world. As their conversation continued, other guests began to notice the extended interaction between the Princess of Wales and the elderly Ghanaian woman. Some observed with curiosity, while others seemed pleased to see such genuine engagement between representatives of different worlds and generations. King Charles, who had been observing from across the room, noticed the animation in Catherine's expression as she spoke with Mrs. Okafor. He could see that this was not simply a polite royal conversation, but a genuine exchange that was affecting both women. The king had learned to recognize when Catherine was truly engaged with someone, and he could tell that this interaction was particularly meaningful to her. Mrs. Okafor, growing more comfortable as their conversation progressed, began to share more personal details about her life and work. She spoke about the physical challenges of aging while continuing her educational mission, and her concerns about ensuring the sustainability of her projects. She worried about what would happen to the schools and programs she had established when she was no longer able to maintain them personally. Catherine listened with increasing admiration for this remarkable woman who had dedicated her entire life to serving others. She began to understand that she was in the presence of someone whose contributions to humanity far exceeded those of many world leaders and celebrities who received much greater recognition and acclaim. The princess realized that Mrs. Okafor represented countless unsung heroes around the world who worked tirelessly to make their communities better without expecting praise or reward. These were the people who truly deserved honor and recognition, yet they rarely received the attention given to those with titles, wealth, or political power. As their conversation drew toward a natural conclusion, Catherine felt a profound sense of respect and gratitude for Mrs. Okafor's life of service. She understood that she had been privileged to meet someone who embodied the highest ideals of human compassion and dedication. In that moment, Catherine knew that some gesture of recognition was called for, something that would acknowledge the extraordinary value of Mrs. Okafor's contributions to the world. The formal reception continued around them, but Catherine had become increasingly focused on this one remarkable woman whose life story had touched her so deeply. She sensed that this was one of those pivotal moments she had discussed with King Charles earlier that morning, a time when the right action could carry meaning far beyond its immediate context. The moment arrived with the kind of sudden clarity that sometimes comes when the heart recognizes something profound before the mind fully understands it. Catherine stood facing Mrs. Okafor in the magnificent ballroom, surrounded by dignitaries and diplomatic officials, yet feeling as though they were the only two people in the room. The weight of their conversation hung in the air between them, filled with unspoken respect and mutual understanding. Catherine had reached a decision that felt both spontaneous and inevitable. Everything about Mrs. Okafor's life story, her selfless dedication, her quiet dignity, and her unwavering commitment to helping others had created a perfect storm of admiration in Catherine's heart. The princess understood that she was in the presence of true greatness, the kind that is measured not by titles or wealth, but by positive impact on human lives. The ballroom had grown quieter as other conversations naturally wound down, creating an atmosphere of anticipation even though most guests were unaware that anything significant was about to happen. The crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the assembled crowd, and the soft murmur of polite conversation provided a gentle backdrop to what was about to unfold. Mrs. Okafor stood with the quiet dignity that had characterized her entire life, unaware that she was about to become the center of attention in a way she had never imagined. Her Kent cloth dress seemed to glow in the palace lighting, the rich colors and intricate patterns telling their own story of cultural heritage and personal pride. Despite her earlier nervousness, she now felt comfortable and grateful for the unexpected opportunity to share her life's work with someone who had shown genuine interest and understanding. Catherine took a small step closer to Mrs. Okafor, her expression serious but warm. The princess had made countless public appearances and participated in numerous formal ceremonies, but this moment felt different from any royal protocol she had ever followed. This was not about tradition or ceremony. It was about recognizing authentic human greatness when she encountered it. Mrs. Okafor, Catherine said, her voice clear enough to be heard by those standing nearby. I want you to know that your life's work represents the very best of human nature. Your dedication to education, your commitment to helping children in remote areas, and your personal sacrifice for the betterment of others embodies everything that is noble and worthy of honor. The princess paused, looking directly into Mrs. Okafor's eyes with an intensity that conveyed deep respect and admiration. Around them, other guests had begun to notice that something significant was happening. Conversations gradually quieted as people turned their attention toward the Princess of Wales and the elderly Ghanaian woman. King Charles, who had been engaged in conversation with a group of ambassadors, noticed the shift in the room's energy. He looked toward Catherine and immediately sensed that she was preparing to do something important. The expression on her face was one he had learned to recognize over the years. It indicated that she had made a decision based on deep conviction and was about to act on it regardless of conventional expectations. Your life of service, Catherine continued, her voice growing stronger and more certain, deserves recognition not just from your own community, but from all of us who understand the value of genuine dedication to others. You have spent decades working without recognition, asking for nothing in return except the opportunity to help children receive the education they deserve. Mrs. Okafor felt tears beginning to form in her eyes as she listened to Catherine's words. Never in her 78 years had anyone, let alone someone of such high standing, expressed such profound appreciation for her work. She had always believed that her efforts were simply what any decent person would do when faced with children who needed help, never considering herself deserving of special recognition or praise. The atmosphere in the ballroom had shifted completely. What had begun as a typical diplomatic reception was transforming into something much more meaningful and unexpected. Guests throughout the room had turned their attention toward Catherine and Mrs. Okafor, sensing that they were witnessing something extraordinary, though they couldn't yet predict what form it would take. Catherine felt the weight of the moment settling around her like a mantle. She understood that her next action would be observed and analyzed by everyone present, and likely discussed far beyond the walls of the palace. But she also knew that some moments transcend protocol and demand authentic response, regardless of potential consequences or unconventional appearances. The princess thought briefly about the morning's conversation with King Charles, remembering her words about the power of genuine gestures and the importance of showing humility when the moment called for it. She had not planned this specific action, but she recognized it as exactly the kind of moment she had been contemplating, a time when the right gesture could speak louder than any speech or ceremony. "Mrs. Okafor," Catherine said, her voice now carrying a formal quality that made it clear she was making an important statement. "I believe that true honor should flow toward those who have earned it through service and sacrifice, regardless of their position in society or the circumstances of their birth." With those words, Catherine began to lower herself into what would become the most talked-about curtsy in recent royal history. But this was not the brief, ceremonial bow typically exchanged between royals and dignitaries. Instead, Catherine sank into a deep, prolonged curtsy that spoke of genuine respect and heartfelt admiration. The ballroom fell completely silent as guests realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. Members of the royal household, diplomatic officials, and distinguished visitors all watched in stunned amazement as the Princess of Wales, second in line to become queen consort, bowed deeply to an elderly woman whose greatest wealth was her commitment to helping others. Mrs. Okafor gasped audibly, her hands flying to her heart as she comprehended what was happening. The sight of this elegant, powerful woman lowering herself in such profound respect was almost overwhelming. She instinctively moved to encourage Catherine to rise, but the princess remained in her respectful position for several long seconds, ensuring that everyone present understood the significance of her action. King Charles watched from across the room with a mixture of surprise and deep pride. He had not anticipated this specific moment, but he immediately understood its power and appropriateness. Catherine had found a way to honor genuine human worth while demonstrating the monarchy's capacity for humility and authentic appreciation of service to others. The curtsy seemed to last both forever and only an instant, suspended in time while its full meaning registered with everyone present. When Catherine finally began to rise, her movement was graceful and dignified, her expression serene and confident. She had made her statement, and she showed no sign of regret or uncertainty about her unprecedented action. As Catherine returned to her full height, she reached out to gently take Mrs. Okafor's hands in her own, completing the gesture with a warmth that emphasized the personal nature of her tribute. The older woman was openly crying now, overwhelmed by the honor she had just received and the profound kindness that had prompted it. The silence in the ballroom was broken by the sound of spontaneous applause that began with one guest and quickly spread throughout the room. But this was not the polite, obligatory clapping typical of formal royal events. Instead, it was the kind of heartfelt appreciation that comes from witnessing something genuinely moving and inspirational. Catherine's action had transformed the entire atmosphere of the reception, turning what had been a standard diplomatic gathering into a moment of authentic human connection that would be remembered and discussed for years to come. She had demonstrated that true leadership sometimes requires the courage to break with convention when doing so serves a higher purpose. The applause that filled the ballroom seemed to echo from the very walls of Buckingham Palace, as if the building itself was acknowledging the profound significance of what had just occurred. Guests who had attended hundreds of royal functions throughout their careers found themselves moved by something they had never witnessed before, a moment when genuine human recognition transcended all barriers of protocol, status, and convention. King Charles made his way through the crowd toward Catherine and Mrs. Okafor, his expression reflecting a complex mixture of surprise, pride, and deep understanding. As he approached, the guests naturally created a path for him, their conversations now animated with excitement about what they had just witnessed. The king had seen Catherine navigate countless public situations with grace and intelligence, but This action demonstrated a level of authentic leadership that impressed him deeply. When the king reached them, Mrs. Okafor attempted to curtsy to him as well, but Charles gently prevented her, instead taking her hand warmly in both of his. "Mrs. Okafor," he said with genuine warmth, "it would be my honor to learn more about your remarkable work. The Princess of Wales has excellent judgment about recognizing true worth, and I can see that you have deeply impressed her." The king's words carried special weight because they came not just from the monarch, but from someone who clearly supported and understood Catherine's unprecedented gesture. His immediate acceptance and endorsement of her action sent a powerful message to everyone present that this had not been a breach of protocol, but rather an elevation of protocol to serve its highest purpose. Mrs. Okafor found herself surrounded by warmth and acceptance that exceeded anything she had ever experienced. "Your Majesty," she managed to say through her tears, "I am overwhelmed by such kindness. I have only done what I believed was right, what needed to be done for the children in my community. And that," Catherine said softly, "is exactly why you deserve every bit of recognition and respect. True service comes from the heart, not from duty or obligation. You chose to dedicate your life to helping others when no one was watching, when no one was applauding, and when the work was difficult and thankless." The conversation between the royal couple and Mrs. Okafor continued for several more minutes, with both Catherine and Charles asking detailed questions about her educational projects and expressing genuine interest in her future plans. Their attention was not the polite, brief acknowledgement typically given to reception guests, but rather the sustained, meaningful engagement reserved for people of significant importance. Other guests watched this interaction with fascination, many of them reassessing their own understanding of what constituted true achievement and worthiness of honor. The Princess of Wales had effectively challenged everyone present to consider whether their own contributions to the world matched the selfless dedication demonstrated by this elderly Ghanaian educator. As word of Catherine's curtsy spread throughout the ballroom, the reaction was uniformly positive and deeply emotional. Diplomatic officials who had attended countless formal events found themselves moved by the authenticity of what they had witnessed. Many guests approached Mrs. Okafor throughout the remainder of the reception, eager to learn about her work and express their own admiration for her dedication. Ambassador Richardson from Canada, a veteran diplomat with 30 years of experience, sought out Catherine later in the evening. "Your Royal Highness," he said with obvious emotion, "in all my years of representing my country at international events, I have never seen a gesture that so perfectly captured the values we all claim to support. Your recognition of Mrs. Okafor was not just beautiful, it was profoundly important." Similar comments came from guests throughout the evening. The High Commissioner from Australia mentioned that Catherine's action had given him hope about the future direction of international leadership. A cultural attaché from Kenya said that the curtsy had demonstrated respect for Africa and its people in a way that no formal treaty or diplomatic statement could ever achieve. But perhaps the most significant reaction came from the younger guests present at the reception. Several university students who had been invited as representatives of Commonwealth scholarship programs approached Catherine to express how inspired they felt by her willingness to honor someone based solely on their character and contributions rather than their position or wealth. One young woman from Jamaica, studying medicine on a Commonwealth scholarship, told Catherine that the curtsy had shown her what real leadership looks like. She explained that she had often felt discouraged by the emphasis on status and connections in professional settings, but seeing Catherine bow to Mrs. Okafor had reminded her that true worth came from service to others. These conversations reinforced Catherine's belief that her action had been not only appropriate, but necessary. She understood that many people, particularly young people, were hungry for examples of authentic leadership and genuine recognition of merit over privilege. Her curtsy to Mrs. Okafor had provided exactly that kind of example. Throughout the remainder of the reception, Mrs. Okafor found herself treated as an honored guest in a way she had never imagined possible. Diplomats and cultural leaders sought her out to learn about her work and express their admiration. Several organizations offered to support her educational projects, and multiple universities extended invitations for her to speak about her experiences. The transformation was remarkable to witness. Mrs. Okafor, who had entered the palace feeling uncertain and slightly overwhelmed, now moved through the gathering with quiet confidence, sharing her story and inspiring others with her dedication and wisdom. Catherine's recognition had not only honored Mrs. Okafor, but had also elevated her voice and amplified her message to an international audience. As the evening progressed, Catherine reflected on the unexpected turn the reception had taken. She had arrived with standard expectations for a diplomatic gathering, but her encounter with Mrs. Okafor had created something much more meaningful and memorable. The princess realized that she had witnessed the power of authentic human connection to transform not just individual interactions, but entire environments and atmospheres. King Charles approached Catherine as the reception was winding down, his expression conveying deep satisfaction with how the evening had unfolded. "You have given everyone here something to think about," he said quietly. Your curtsy to Mrs. Okafor was more than a gesture of respect. It was a statement about values and priorities that many people needed to hear. Catherine smiled, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction about her decision to honor Mrs. Okafor in such a public and meaningful way. "I believe that our role is not just to receive respect, but to give it where it's truly deserved," she replied. "Mrs. Okafor has spent her life serving others without recognition. The least I could do was ensure that her dedication received the acknowledgement it deserves." The king nodded approvingly, understanding that Catherine had found a way to use her position and influence to highlight the kind of character and service that truly mattered. Her action had demonstrated that the monarchy could serve as more than just a symbol of tradition. It could also be a force for recognizing and encouraging the best aspects of human nature. As the final guests began to depart from the palace, many of them carried with them a renewed understanding of what constituted true greatness. Catherine's curtsy to Mrs. Okafor had created a moment of clarity that would influence how they thought about leadership, service, and the proper recognition of human worth for years to come. The news of Catherine's unprecedented curtsy to Mrs. Okafor spread far beyond the walls of Buckingham Palace with a speed that surprised even the most experienced royal communications staff. By the following morning, footage captured by official palace photographers had been shared across social media platforms worldwide, generating millions of views, shares, and overwhelmingly positive comments from people of all backgrounds and nationalities. The image that captured the world's attention showed the exact moment of Catherine's deep bow to Mrs. Okafor, the Princess of Wales in her elegant emerald gown, lowered in profound respect before the elderly Ghanaian educator in her beautiful traditional Kent cloth. The photograph seemed to encapsulate everything that people hoped to see from their leaders: humility, recognition of true worth, and respect for service over status. Major international news organizations led their broadcasts with the story, but the coverage was unlike typical royal reporting. Instead of focusing on fashion choices or protocol details, journalists found themselves discussing deeper questions about leadership, recognition, and the values that society should celebrate. The story had transcended royal news to become a conversation about human dignity and authentic appreciation. Mrs. Okafor awoke in her London hotel room to discover that she had become an international symbol of dedicated service. The phone in her room rang constantly with interview requests from news outlets around the world, all eager to learn more about the woman who had inspired such an extraordinary gesture from the Princess of Wales. The attention was overwhelming, but Mrs. Okafor handled it with the same grace and humility that had characterized her entire life. In Ghana, the reaction was particularly powerful. The country's president issued a statement praising both Mrs. Okafor's lifetime of service and Catherine's recognition of it. Today, the world has seen that true greatness lies not in titles or wealth, but in dedication to improving the lives of others, the statement read. Mrs. Okafor represents the best of Ghana, and the Princess of Wales has shown the world what enlightened leadership looks like. Schools throughout Ghana held special assemblies to discuss Mrs. Okafor's work and the significance of Catherine's tribute. Children who had never heard of the elderly educator suddenly found themselves inspired by her story and motivated to think about how they too might serve their communities. Teachers reported that the story had sparked unprecedented interest in education and community service among their students. The impact extended far beyond Ghana's borders. In villages and cities across Africa, people gathered around radios and television sets to hear about the British princess who had bowed to honor an African grandmother's service to education. The gesture resonated particularly powerfully in communities where dedicated individuals worked tirelessly without recognition, seeing in Catherine's action a validation of their own efforts to make a difference. Back at Buckingham Palace, The communications team worked to manage the unprecedented positive response to Catherine's action. Royal communications staff, accustomed to carefully controlling the narrative around royal activities, found themselves in the unusual position of managing overwhelmingly favorable coverage that required no damage control or clarification. King Charles called a private meeting with Catherine to discuss the global reaction to her curtsy. As they sat in the same study where they had spoken the morning before, both reflected on how significantly the situation had evolved from their earlier conversation about authentic moments in royal life. "I don't think either of us anticipated quite this level of response," Charles said with a smile. "But I'm increasingly convinced that your instincts were absolutely correct. The world seems to have been waiting for exactly this kind of gesture." Catherine nodded, still somewhat surprised by the intensity of the global reaction. "I simply saw someone whose life deserved recognition and felt compelled to provide it. I never imagined it would resonate with so many people around the world." "I think," the king replied thoughtfully, "that your action spoke to something many people feel but rarely see expressed, the belief that real worth should be recognized regardless of someone's position in society. You demonstrated that true leadership means understanding who deserves honor, not just who traditionally receives it." The conversation was interrupted by a call from the palace communications director, who reported that requests for interviews and statements about the curtsy were continuing to pour in from around the world. More significantly, several major charitable organizations had contacted the palace to express interest in supporting Mrs. Okafor's educational work in Ghana. Catherine felt deep satisfaction knowing that her gesture had not only honored Mrs. Okafor personally but had also created opportunities to amplify and support her important work. This outcome exceeded anything she had hoped for when she made the spontaneous decision to bow in recognition of the elderly educator's contributions. Later that afternoon, Catherine received a call from Mrs. Okafor herself. The older woman's voice was filled with emotion as she tried to express her gratitude for what had happened. "Your Royal Highness," she said, "I cannot find adequate words to thank you. What you did yesterday has changed everything for my work and for the children we serve." Mrs. Okafor went on to explain that several international education organizations had already committed to funding new schools in Ghana, citing Catherine's recognition of her work as their inspiration. A major university had offered her an honorary doctorate and a platform to speak about rural education initiatives. Perhaps most importantly, young people from around the world had begun contacting her to volunteer for her educational projects. "You have given my life's work a voice it never had before," Mrs. Okafor continued. "But more than that, you have shown the world that service to others is worthy of the highest respect. That message will inspire countless people to dedicate themselves to helping their communities." Catherine listened with growing emotion, realizing that her moment of authentic respect had created ripple effects far beyond what she had imagined possible. The curtsy had not only honored one remarkable individual, but had also elevated the concept of service-based leadership on a global stage. In the weeks that followed, the story continued to generate positive coverage and meaningful conversations. Educational institutions began using the event as a case study in authentic leadership. Business schools analyzed Catherine's action as an example of how leaders could demonstrate values through concrete actions rather than just speeches or policies. Perhaps most significantly, the story inspired similar gestures of recognition around the world. Politicians began highlighting local heroes in their communities. Corporate leaders started recognizing employees whose contributions went beyond their job descriptions. Teachers found new ways to honor students who helped their classmates succeed. Mrs. Okafor returned to Ghana with renewed energy and unprecedented resources to continue her educational mission. She established a foundation to ensure the sustainability of her work and began training younger educators to carry on her methods in other regions. The international attention had transformed her individual efforts into a movement with global reach and lasting impact. Catherine reflected on the experience months later, understanding that her spontaneous curtsy had become a defining moment of her royal career. The action had demonstrated her instinct for authentic leadership and her willingness to use her position to recognize genuine human worth. More importantly, it had shown the world that the monarchy could serve as a force for highlighting and encouraging the best aspects of human nature. The image of Catherine's bow to Mrs. Okafor continued to circulate widely, becoming an enduring symbol of respect, humility, and the recognition of true service. It represented a moment when protocol had served its highest purpose, not to maintain distance between people, but to bridge differences and honor what really mattered. King Charles often referenced the event in subsequent speeches about the monarchy's role in modern society. He spoke of it as an example of how royal influence could be used to elevate important voices and recognize overlooked contributions. The curtsy had become more than just a gesture. It had evolved into a template for meaningful leadership in action. Years later, historians would mark Catherine's bow to Mrs. Okafor as a turning point in public perception of the royal family, a moment when authentic human connection had transcended traditional barriers and demonstrated the monarchy's capacity for genuine humility and respect. It had shown the world that true greatness could recognize true greatness, regardless of titles, wealth, or social position. The quiet bow that had stunned everyone, including King Charles, had ultimately become one of the most powerful statements about values and leadership in recent royal history.